Today on The Big Questions, did man create God? Good morning, good to see you. I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Questions. Today we're back at Wychwood School in Oxford to debate one very big question. Did man create God? Welcome everyone to The Big Questions. Now, the dawning of religious belief is suggested by the graves of Neanderthals and other early hominids who lived between 225,000 and 100,000 years ago. By around 10,000 BC, organised religions emerged within the first Neolithic cities, states and kingdoms like Göbekli Tepe in what is now Turkey, the oldest human-made place of worship yet discovered. And the first wooden posts were erected at the site of Stonehenge 2,000 years later. Hinduism, the world's oldest living religion, began to emerge in the Indus Valley around 5,000 years ago. Religious beliefs and practices are probably as old as mankind. But which came first, man or gods? Did man create God? Well, to debate that, we've gathered together a distinguished array of theologians, philosophers, psychologists, writers, people from various faiths and of none. And you can join in too on Twitter or online by logging on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. Follow the link to the online discussion and lots of encouragement, contributions from our extremely erudite Oxford audience. Bruce Hood, Professor Bruce Hood, experimental psychologist, Bristol University. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Nicky.
Right. Our species, Homo sapiens, we emerged from Homo erectus, heidelbergensis, Agaster, about 150,000, 100,000 years ago. Our brains grew gradually, and they got to the point that they are at today. Why did we start to need to believe?
Well, we're a social animal, and social groups coalesce around belief systems. And it's a very powerful mechanism to identify who's a member of your group, especially if you have to take their beliefs on trust in the absence of evidence. But of course, our brains have evolved to try and make sense of the world, to try and predict it. And an unpredictable world is pretty frightening. So if you don't know what's going to happen with the crops or the migration of animals, you might try and engage in some activities to try and control that. That's just in our nature to do this. So I can see the origins of rituals as serving a purpose to try and explain the world around you, but also as a mechanism to kind of coalesce social groups.
What about dealing with mortality, understanding mortality and finding solace for those we've lost? Was that an important factor, do you think?
Absolutely. I think the fact that there were ritual practices and graves must have been some sense of the afterlife. I think most of us still have this urge and need to know what's going to happen to us, so that's never really going to go away. And of course, if someone provides a very good story about what happens, then that's easily understood and accepted.
And we can understand that need,
yeah,
very much, as we know if we've lost loved ones. So, Professor Theresa Morgan, here's the thing. It's a long span of time, isn't it? Homo sapiens, 150,000, 100,000 years. Why did we, as a species, live until 5,000 years ago, believing in supernatural forces and animism and river sprites and gods of thunder, and it took until then to get the idea of a single creator? It's if God created man, it's a bit late in the day, isn't it?
Well, we don't know very much about what people thought more than 5,000 years ago because they didn't leave written records, so they didn't describe very much about, what they did. We don't really know. Actually, I wanted to answer Bruce more directly and say that what worries me about that kind of explanation is if you take an example of something else that is very important to us but a bit different from religion, something like love. A sociologist can say, well, it's all about, creating stable social structures. And a psychologist can say, well, it's just, it's a byproduct of evolution, or it's a way of creating bonding so that parents look after their children, all that. But actually our own experience of love, and say love that creates a long-term relationship, is that it's far more than that. And I think sort of explanations of religion that try to explain religion away never quite capture the full richness of experience of people who believe. So I would say that, there's always a difference between the sort of the insider and the outsider perspective.
Well, I
We
believe in
didn't quite,
fantasy.
okay, Bruce, we didn't quite get to the question, which I appreciate what you're saying. I want to come back to it, but Arif, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, there is a difference in the insider and the outsider perspective could be said by anyone who believes any kind of conspiracy theory or any of the 99,000 religions which you, presumably, and all religious people believe to be nonsense. The other thing I would say is that, of course, what Professor Hood does, two things about what Professor Hood said. I mean, one of them is that it shows that the widespreadness of religious belief is no evidence whatever for its truth, okay, because it can be explained in other ways. So there isn't the slightest reason to believe that. And the other thing I would say is that he doesn't have to show it decisively to be true for the purposes of this debate. He doesn't have to overcome all the competing scientific theories for the purposes of this debate or any sentimentalism about love or other things. He has to show that it's more likely than people who believe in talking snakes and resurrection.
Can I come back to that first point again? Can you go with me on this? There's lots of evidence of goddesses before and many gods and animism and people worshipping animal gods, but there is very little evidence going back tens of thousands of years of worship of monotheistic faith. Can you just address this? Say I'm right. Why would a rare occasion, why would the idea of this single divine entity come so late to mankind?
Well, I still think you don't know, actually, whether it did or not.
Go with
However,
me.
leaving
Go
that
with
aside,
me. Just pretend.
Leaving that aside.
Why would that happen?
I think you might say in a lot of religious traditions that there is a tendency for a sense of multiple divinities to coalesce over time into a sense of a single divinity. And I think it happens for different reasons. One is that a sort of Bruce-type explanation might be that single divinities are more powerful, more complex, and therefore more satisfying, more psychologically satisfying. Another reason is that cultures collide and get into wars with one another, and as it were, you decide that your god is, first of all, the strongest among all the local gods. That, you know, there is a little bit of early evidence in the Hebrew Bible, for instance, for believers in the God of Israel, thinking of him as the strongest of local gods.
I'm going further back than that, but you're saying it's a kind of logical conclusion.
Over time. Yeah,
okay.
Over time it develops into the sense that there is actually only one real God. That seems to be quite a common
But
process.
surely also there's the fact is that monotheist gods do something wonderful, which other gods don't do. They're wonderful for empires.
Yeah,
They're wonderful for bringing a whole lot of heterogeneous
one
people
flag,
together.
one god,
you go for
one
one
nation,
god,
yeah.
and then you all agree with each other. This is my guy, and that's for empires. That's crucial thing to be.
Yeah.
Let me take it back. We're navigating some fascinating terrain here. Why not? I mean, going back, is there evidence of monotheism going back 40, 50, 60,000 years?
No, but there's evidence of very much smaller groups of deities. The question about love I thought was really interesting because, of course, love is exactly the same as a social explanation for belief or religious practice. Love is exactly the same. We begin to believe, we begin to develop and construct the notion of a deity, something beyond us, because of our continuing social bonds with the people that have gone, with the dead people, our ancestors. And these gods basically become more and more powerful, but it's purely because of love. We are unable to let go or sever bonds, even those of us that think that's love is still, it's one of the greatest social, it's not just a social tool, we are social beings, and it's what keeps us all together.
Elaine
Elaine
Storkey, theologian and author, you know, we are social beings, it keeps us together, social cohesion, and also the creation of myths and telling stories to each other around the fire, the remembrance of those who are gone. You can understand the logic from this side of the argument about that. But if we were created in the image of God, and I know you believe that, what about, I mean, there's evidence of ritualistic behaviour by Neanderthals. Were they, for example, created in the image of God?
Huh. There were so many things all packed in together.
Well, take the last question first. The last question of a rather rambling question. Yeah, Neanderthals, would they have been created in the image of God?
If they were human beings, yes.
Well, they were a species of human beings.
Yes, well, I mean, in a sense, does it matter whether they were or not? So that's the first question. I'm agnostic on Neanderthals, completely agnostic.
What does that mean?
It means that I believe that they were there at some point in even human evolution.
Yeah. Same time as us.
Whether they were human in the same way that we are, and therefore, in a sense, whether they had the same relationship with God that human life has, is for me questionable. And therefore, I'm agnostic on it. I'm not.
Well, it's interesting, but there are 4 or 5 species of human on the planet at the same time, about 50,000 years ago.
Right,
But we are the survivors. Bruce?
The point of information is that they're still here. Genetically, we contain DNA from Neanderthals.
Unless
it never
you're,
went away.
unless you're from Africa.
That's the interesting point, yes.
Yeah.
I'd say monotheism predates polytheism. Basically, if you took all the scriptures of all writing of the world and everything, removed it, 5,000 years in the future, people would say, well, Islam and Judaism didn't believe in any god because we can't find any statues of the gods of Judaism and Islam.
You can,
and so on, right?
What's your evidence?
Well, no, not of Islam and Judaism. No, I would beg to differ.
No, you
and
can.
of course, if you
Very
look at
transparent.
all world religions, polytheistic ones, the Mayans and the Egyptians and so on, they always have a head god, a creator god. In some cases, not even represented with an image. And what I would say is that polytheism is a degeneration of monotheism. And I think all that the research has shown by some of the researchers down there has shown that humans have a tendency to believe in superstition and anthropomorphize the natural world, yes, but it doesn't mean the natural world doesn't exist just because humans anthropomorphize. The sun exists, even though people used to think it was a man or a woman, or that the sky was made of a woman, which was the Egyptian belief. But it doesn't mean that the sky doesn't exist and the sun doesn't exist. It means that humans have incorrectly anthropomorphized the natural world, and they've also incorrectly anthropomorphized God. But people come to the conclusion of God because God is the rational conclusion based on the problem of
Abdullah,
causality.
When you said that polytheism was a degeneration from monotheism,
Yeah.
I don't remember, there was a comedian once called Frankie Howard used to go, oh, you just did that, Tim.
I did just do that, yes. And, yeah, I thought when you said there's a comedian who used to... And then you pointed at me. I thought I was going to be the comedian.
You can do a turn if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, firstly, there's absolutely no evidence that monotheism predates polytheism. And we need to talk in terms of evidence, don't we? I mean, we've got to be responsible and rational about this. We need evidence, OK? The oldest evidence that we have for religious practice is polytheistic, OK? The other thing I'd say is that we're folding an awful lot in here together. Religion is a modern category. I mean, it's been very well documented, lots of studies on this. Religion is a way of understanding the world that we impose on things. So all of these things that we're talking about here, say ritualized behavior by early Homo sapiens.
And other hominids.
And other hominids, civic cult in ancient Greece, modern Islam, Judeo-Christian monotheism, and so forth. These are not necessarily the same categories of experience, but the one thing that we can tell is that all of these categories are socially responsive. They reflect the makeup of the society at that time. They do things that that society wants them to do. So you don't get Islam before Muhammad. You don't get sort of proto-forms of Judaism and Christianity before these religions emerge. They are historical constructs, and they emerge in that way for particular reasons. Okay, so the civic religions of classical Greece responded to a civic structure, which was basically everyone lived in a city, so you needed a religion unifying that city. Christianity and Islam emerged in very sort of complex situations, but they gained power as part of, as somebody said earlier, as part of a kind of imperial system. So they respond very well. These centralizing religions based around a single god who rules everything, they're very good allegories of empire. They do many other things as well. I'm not saying that's all they do, but they are socially responsive. And if you want one very good piece of evidence for the idea that religion is a social construct, think again about gender, okay? The fact that almost every society that we've had so far has been male-dominated. Almost every religion is male-dominated. That is because the two are responding to each other, religion and society.
Right, Charlotte. I heard a little twinkle in your eye there. Yeah.
I don't have any problem with that. As a religious leader, as a rabbi within a congregation who's dealing with real people who are scientists, doctors.
What about the goddesses? Where are the goddesses?
Yeah, I think we're re-putting them back in when we perceive God within our modern eyes. I don't think that there's a problem with the fact that revelation continues and that we're, as religious leaders or as people who are practicing religion within a modern world, that we can't have both, that we can't understand that the way that we perceive the world is through our own construct, because we are human. And so therefore the way that we perceive God and the way that we perceive religion is limited by the fact that we're human. And so I look at my text and obviously there are female voices missing. But here I am as a woman rabbi in a progressive movement, very much a rabbi within liberal Judaism who practices her religion in a way that feels relevant and real to me. And that's because I have reconstructed my view of religion based on my own context. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist, because I happen to be limited by my own human powers.
OK, I want to stick with, because I know Selina O'Grady, author of And Man Created God. Where are you coming from on this one?
I would have to say that...
Where are the goddesses? I mean, the
created
point very articulately put by Tim there, that the mere, the manifestation of religion in its womanless form shows that it's created by men. Do you buy that?
Yes, I do. I mean, but I think that the God that we create changes over time. So you get a Jewish God that's for a particular tribe who've lost their homeland, who says, I'm just going to protect you lot, and if you obey my rules, I'll give you promised land. You get the Roman gods, exactly, which is based on the client-patron relationship of Rome. So you get these huge big patrons. If you give them a lamb, with any luck, they'll cure your fertility problems or whatever. But it's a client-patron relationship on which Rome is based. You get the Christian God, and I'm surprised that love comes in so early, because in a sense, the Christian God seems to be the first real loving God. These Roman gods.
That's ridiculous.
These Roman gods do nothing but just give or not give.
I think one of the
Jewish
things...
God,
Wow,
but the Jewish God, I think, is for a specific people. And the thing about the Christian God is that this is what Paul does so cleverly, I think, in creating Christianity, is to open up that love and protection of a particular tribe to a whole group of people who are living in this sort of the first phase of globalization in the Roman Empire, where they've lost all sense of community. They're in these huge big cities. And he gives them a sense of, look, I love you all, you love each other all, in a way that the Jewish God just goes for this particular group.
Can you find... love. Love. All you need is love. Can you get it in previous gods and goddesses?
Of course you do, and I think it's incredibly arrogant of any kind of Christian to present their own religion as somehow, or any idea of Christianity as being somehow more elevated, something innovative.
No, I'm not saying it's more elevated. It just does it.
It doesn't do it better.
For Francesca, what are you, a biblical scholar or something?
Exactly.
Oh, you are? Right, OK. So.
Look, I'm not saying it does it better.
Your caricature
I'm simply
Jewish
saying
God was completely offensive.
It's
Absolutely,
It's
agree.
completely offensive, and I'm amazed that it's such an outdated idea. Of course, the Jewish God, the God of the Hebrew Bible, is a loving God.
Listen,
it's not about particularity, and to suggest that Christianity somehow opens up this massive deity to the rest of the world is incredibly outdated and offensive.
I'm sorry.
You're all speaking at once, but I want to hear... Wait. I want to hear... We're having a civilised Sunday morning discussion about God, all right? Listen, what about goddesses, then?
Can I please just answer this?
OK.
That I'm just saying this is how these gods arrive. They arrive to fulfil particular purposes. The Jewish God arrived to fulfil a particular purpose for a particular set of people.
But yes, can we just be clear one thing, which is that it is a distortion to say that either the God of the Old Testament or the God of the New Testament is probably called loving.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more dull and spiteful character than the Jehovah of the Old Testament. And anyone who looks at the history of, for instance, the Catholic Church could never have...
OK, everybody, I want to talk about goddesses. I want to talk about goddesses. It's not a sentence I've said a lot in my life, but I do right now. I know you say it all the time. Where are the goddesses? Why did the goddesses or goddess get squeezed out of the religious equation?
Partly because the goddesses were massively powerful and they played a really important role with the male deities, but also because gender in the ancient world, including the ancient world from which the Hebrew Bible emerged, the world from which the New Testament text emerged, their notion of gender was very, very different from ours. The deities had a very fluid sense of gender. There wasn't just one male and one female gender. It was a very, very
transgender
fluid.
deities.
Exactly, and they were very... And so different deities could perform different roles. The goddesses become erased, sometimes literally in terms of their statues and their cult objects, but sometimes literally as well from the text. They're erased because of this prioritisation of a particular deity at a particular political point in a particular time in history, as Tim was saying. It's all about politics. That's why you get hierarchies. When a human society becomes more hierarchical, even a very small group, it's basically earning the money. You've got one temple, one deity, all the money from that is going to come to that temple. Whoever's in charge of the temple is going to have more political power. It's a centralisation. And that's where the idea of the prioritisation of one deity comes from. So the goddesses never disappear. People continue to worship the goddesses. I mean, in one way, she's reinvented, if you like, in the figure of Mary, the Queen of Heaven, within Christianity.
Yeah.
Listen, I heard out the corner of my ear.
ISIS.
Oh, dear. Elaine, stalking.
I'm sorry, this has been around 30 years. It's a tired, wearying concept that somehow Mary is a reincarnation of a goddess.
Queen of Heaven, her title is a
please
goddess
let me finish.
title.
Let me finish. I think what we're hearing here, and I'm interested in the debate, it's a good debate because we're looking at the social constructions of religion, the social constructions of deities and so on. And in that sense, of course, human beings have been creating gods since time immemorial, and they have been worshipping them, bowing down to them. They've made them of marble, stone, wood.
Or trees.
Trees, suns, moons and so on.
Yes.
Everything, male and female, all kinds of genitalia going on within the Godhead and
You're not wrong.
spurious relationships, you know, really weirdo things going on between Roman sexual gods.
One
and so on.
person's weirdo thing is another person, you know.
Leaving all that aside, Nikki, if we're not interested in your ramifications here.
Yeah.
I mean, so nobody's disputing this. I mean, this, you know, any scholar, any half-baked scholar can go to any book anywhere and find this out. So why we're giving... Let me finish.
Let Elaine finish, please. Please let Elaine finish.
Why are we giving this an enormous intellectual status as though somehow this solves the problem of religion right through the earth and explains
They're
who
not
God is?
half-baked scholars. They're the Great
No, I'm
British
not
Bake Off,
suggesting-
full-on, full, wonderful caked scholars.
I'm saying
over
any
here.
half-baked scholar could
Right. Wait
find
a
this
minute.
information. But the point is, what we're looking at here are epistemological questions. Questions about how we know, how we do our research, what kind of research do we do, and what methodology we do use. Well, actually, the questions about God are ontological questions, about the whole nature of being. What is it to have a divine being, and what does that divine being look like? And that divine being is not something we can create. As little Olivia, 12-year-old, said to her mother the other day, we just don't have the intelligence to create a creator. We're only mortal human beings with mortal minds.
On which point, there's time. Don't worry, everyone, there's time.
nice line,
On which
but
point,
no.
I think it's the perfect segue now into a representative of the oldest existing religion on earth. No, it's not you, Abdullah. It is our Hindu representative, Satish Sharma, General Secretary of the National Council of Hindu Temples, oldest existing religion. So, when Hinduism first emerged, would it have been by revelation, by intuition? I mean, you know, how?
It's been difficult to sit here, but it's always good fun to see our adolescents at play. I would just share that the lens through which all of this discussion has happened so far.
What about the question I just asked you? Never mind lenses.
In a very
Never mind lenses.
Mediterranean and
Okay,
Near Eastern
very
focus, and I think
straightforward.
it's the point, really.
We have a tradition which says that mystics are always followed by miscreants. And so far in the discussion, we haven't really touched on the notion of a mystical experience. In our earliest records, there are records which are recorded by mystics. And in terms of our time frame, we go back a little bit further than that. And we celebrated 5,154 years of the articulation of one of our core central texts, because there are astronomical references within it which help us to define time frames. So we work on a different cosmology and a different time frame. But this notion that mystics are always followed by miscreants is very, very valuable. There is an established tradition. We have thousands of books, and they're all the records of people who have engaged in some sort of a practice involving them introverting and connecting with a sense of union with every other creature on the planet and on the planet itself. And they've tried to articulate that, but when you articulate a personal experience to people who haven't had that experience, their chattering minds get involved. And so that's where the miscreants come. And there are always miscreants who are happy to leverage the adulation that mystics seem to get for political purposes. So we have a precision that we would apply, and that is, you use the term religion. We would say that when you say religion, you're actually discussing theocracies. Our perspective is that theocracies are merely dictatorships with an invisible, immortal dictator who cannot be deposed. And they're the ideal tool for anybody wanting to exert political power. So we would separate...
We've had a bit of that so far.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and it's actually very
acknowledgement
relevant
of it.
because at this time we have two theocracies from our perspective battling for primacy of power on the earth and indeed in this country. It's wonderful here. We have a tradition of democracy which is battling with theocracy as well. And the House of Commons was established as a challenge to the Church of England.
And autocracy, throw that one in
Yeah.
too.
Absolutely. But the notion of the mystical experience has primacy with us. Once a person's had a mystical experience, then you recognise that actually that mystical experience represents itself in a gender-free environment. Our tradition, 5,000 years, we would say a lot more than 5,000 years, we have never had a theocracy in India. And that's because of the multiplicity, the pure democracy of how you wish to engage
like the caste
with
system.
divinity. Well, caste is a Portuguese word, and like all words, words have concepts behind them. There is no word in the Indian Sanskrit or indeed the Hindu vocabulary for caste. I would share with you that caste is something that was exported to India, and it has no place in the Indian scriptures.
Still got it, though.
Nor indeed practice.
In a minute, Cole. Arif.
Thanks. Yeah, I think Satish actually put his finger on an important distinction.
He did.
There is a difference between the sort of votive side of religion and the mystery side of religion, the side which involves social interactions and the side which involves a kind of inner experience. And it's true that a lot of these explanations we've been discussing are to do with religion as a social phenomenon, but there is something else as well, which is the mystical experience. But of course, that's not to say that that has got no explanation. There's a variety of competing psychological explanations for that, to do with behaviour of the temporal lobes and various other sorts of theories. Many of them, certainly one of them is true, and many of them have a great deal more plausibility than the idea that any religious claim is true. So I think the conclusion would be that religion obviously has a variety of explanations because it covers a variety of phenomena.
And I wouldn't dream.
Okay, I want to just move it on slightly, but Selina, you have been trying to jump back in. We're going to give Cole in a second.
Two things.
And I'm telling you, let me announce, maybe make an announcement. We're going to talk about the relationship between religions and God and no God in just a second. So you've led us very nicely into it, Satish. Organised religion.
We've been doing this a long time.
You've been very desperate to say something.
I want to say two things. One is that Isis was a goddess, and she did incredibly well. She really was a kind of... It felt like a sort of world-beater religion that was going to do far better than this little Christian Jesus cult.
What happened?
She didn't do it as well as Jesus and Christianity did under Paul, which is she started addressing these questions of a personal relationship with her devotee, of promising some kind of afterlife. It wasn't quite clear whether it was going to be just longer life or afterlife, of giving you a sense of community, of doing all these things. But that little Jewish cult under Paul did all this much, much better and gave you, which I think Teresa kind of didn't say in your that why we need God and why God is there, which is a sense of oughts. That's what religions do so well, which is actually give you a sense of values and how you should lead your life.
Was she not apocalyptic? Was she?
No, she's
you're,
very
that's
much
the other ISIS.
Well, Christ was an apocalypticist, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
He was. Yeah.
Well,
there's lots of
yes,
evidence that
he's
Christ was an
in the sense that he
apocalypticist.
was a Messiah and that the end of the world would come.
In your time, he said to his disciples.
In your time, yes, and he got that wrong.
He got well. Cole Morton, haven't heard from Cole yet. Now you're a very, very intelligent man and a marvellous writer. You're not a great fan of religions. You're not a great fan of religions, but you're a big fan of God. I know that, if that's fair to say. If there is no God, can you understand the logic of the development of religion in our minds?
Absolutely, I can. I'm not a theologian or a scientist, I'm just a storyteller. And I know that when you start to tell a story, one of the things that happens next is that people begin to take control of the story. They say, this is my story, and maybe it forms their community, maybe it forms their identity, maybe they go to war on the basis of it. And what we've seen in religion is we've seen that, one of the reasons why we talked about the goddess, one of the reasons why the goddess is very popular in contemporary culture, why neo-paganism is embracing the goddess in a big way, is because we've had many, many years of patriarchal, oppressive religions. So that is bubbling up, and we're seeing that. But we're now also in a place where one of the stories that people are telling is, we actually have grown up, we understand the world better, we can do all of this on the basis of rationality and science. And therefore, as you said earlier, all of these stories from all of these places have now got to be judged on the basis of science. Well, that's another perspective. It's another act of faith. And when I think of the...
It's not an act of faith, Cole.
There could be better evidence.
OK. I mean, if you're telling me that you think that science ultimately contains all of the answers...
Science works.
Well, I'm not talking about working. And
science is tentative. That's the beauty of science.
Yeah, but indeed it is when it's done properly. But what I'm talking about is We can describe
continued, it's tested,
we
and
can
it's
describe
revived.
what is happening in front of us in all of these
Repeatable.
different ways, but that doesn't take away the sense of mystery, the sense of there is something else. And it may be that all of these competing stories have an element of truth in their own way, but what they're not doing is
Cole,
revealing to us what
aren't you in the
mystery is
danger
there.
of falling into the notorious God of the gaps here? That once upon a time they were saying, the thing is, there's always going to be a mystery. We're never going to understand what thunder is. Then they understand it, and the gap moves elsewhere. You're in this subatomic world. We're never going to understand the subatomic world.
embrace it.
That's
Bring it-
where God is. And then, when we understand the subatomic world, you've got a problem.
Yeah, well, we're 96% of matter. We don't know what it is at the moment. You know, I mean,
but when we do,
when you go subatomic, the mystery widens. When you go cosmic, the mystery widens.
God is in the all.
I want to just
the gaps are moving. They're moving.
I want to tell you something from the Indus Valley. Okay, this is my favourite story about this. There's six blind men. They're blindfolded in a room, and they're holding on to this creature, and they're saying, "What is this creature?" And one of them saying, "Well, it's a rope. It feels like a rope." Another one's saying it feels like a sail. Another one's saying it feels like a great big tree trunk. They're all grasping onto different aspects of an elephant. The elephant is still there, even while they're arguing about what the elephant is really like.
And the message is be careful what you grasp, especially if it's elephant.
Absolutely.
Arif, do you want to come back in here? Science.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would say about
Then
the
we'll move on
gaps
to religion.
is that, of course, there have been, as you said, Nicky, thousands of gaps, as in things we couldn't explain at the time. Every single one of them that has been explained by science hasn't been explained by religion. So we've got about as good evidence as you could possibly have that no gap concerning our understanding can be filled by these religious beliefs. On the point about mystery, I mean, I agree that in a sense, one needn't be a materialist or something. You can certainly think that there are other things in life, there are things that have value to people and so on, but people can have value for each other. People can care about things that matter, like music, the arts, or science, one another, personal relationships, political activism. There are so many things in life that can matter to people and give life meaning that have got nothing to do.
What you're doing is you're doing the same as the religions are doing and claiming this is my story and my story is true.
Let's move. No, I want to move on to really. We can pick up actually monotheism and religions in general. Islam, the new kid on the block, Abdullah, came along very, very recently. And you've got...
Well, for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, no, you've been coming on this show for about 3 years. But yeah. Islam itself came along, what, 7th century, was it? Something like that. So, but Muhammad Muhammad in the 670s, something like that. And so, basically, we've got this religion, monotheism. We've had mention of this already. It's a great means of political control and empire building, isn't it? And, you know, the Islamic Empire, one flag, one empire, one nation, one people.
It wasn't really an empire, but...
Well, it turned into an empire after that. But you can understand the logic, can't you, taking it away from your religious belief? You can understand the logic and the politically efficacious nature of monotheism.
Not really. People can believe in the same God and be divided. It doesn't make any difference.
But it's better than polytheism, lots of different gods.
But the point I've been trying to highlight is, firstly, science itself is limited to the natural world. Yep. And we don't put religion into the natural world in terms of, well, at least Muslims and Jews and others don't put religion into the natural world saying this is miraculous here and here and here. Science is limited to the goldfish bowl of this universe, an opaque goldfish bowl, and if there's these two atheist goldfish inside this goldfish bowl, would think there's nothing outside their goldfish bowl. But rationally, you can deduce there must be something outside it, and this is where rationality and pure atheist empiricism clash.
I want to talk less about that than the development of religion. Social control.
Well, see, the thing is this.
Military control.
Well, the thing is this. We approach this history with an anachronistic, secular kind of perspective. In the Indian culture, for example, Dharma was, I suppose, what they would call their entire culture. Dharma meaning law. And, of course, the Torah, the word means law as well. Religion, culture, law were all one and the same thing. Secularism is a very modern construct. People didn't divide religion here. Every country, in a way, or every civilization was, quote-unquote, a theocracy in that sense, because everyone's politics was driven by their morals, which was driven by their belief in afterlife, in gods, in the cosmology, and so on. And the modern day...
And a desire for land and
the modern day religion that controls people is nationalism, I would say. Yeah. Because we get the current ruling party telling us that we will have to follow, for example, British values to unite this
country.
Debate. Well, exactly, but that's also you could argue that's also a means of control.
Let me try it again, Theresa Morgan. In terms of social control, Theresa, for rulers, for chiefs, for kings, for tribal chiefs, whatever, religion is handy, isn't it?
Oh, no question. Religion is very handy. But anybody can use more or less anything to exert social control. I mean, democracy is a value which autocrats can subvert for their own use. Autocrats can subvert
doesn't
anything for their own
invalidate
use.
the
That's fine.
premise.
Doesn't invalidate it. I mean, so in a sense, that's neither here or there. I think in a way you are underestimating the extent to which religions are also countercultural and demand things of their adherents that are unexpected and often, on the face of it, unhelpful. I mean, I certainly feel that in trying seriously to follow my own faith tradition in my daily job, I am constantly shooting myself in the foot and doing things that actually will not serve me well.
But
politically
Jesus
and
Christ
socially.
himself was extremely bothersome, wasn't he? And
Quite.
and
Didn't do him a bit of
countercultural.
good.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that's true. I mean, that's even true of traditions like Greek and Roman religions, I think. Tim may disagree with me, but which it is easy for us to think about in rather socially reductionist terms as reflecting and serving social and political systems, because there are no longer living believers in those systems to kind of give a different view. But if you think, for instance, about a concept like justice, dikaiosune, dike in the Greek world, it has several different ranges of meaning. Justice can mean what is socially normative, whatever the mass of people think is okay. It can mean what the law says is okay, which may not be the same as current public opinion or what the current leaders of the city want. Or it can mean what the gods think is justice. And Greeks often struggled a lot with their sense of what the gods thought justice was, which didn't always fit with their sense of justice at all, either because it was more demanding or because it looked actually cruel or random. You know, both, people protest against the justice of the gods, both that it's cruel, that it doesn't fit what we would hope for, but also that it's too high a standard for us to kind of aspire to. So in all sorts of
Then
ways,
it's God
even
knows
Greek and
best.
Roman religion...
Then God knows best comes in, doesn't it?
So all sorts of religions, and it's true all the way through the Hebrew Bible, it's true in Christian traditions, certainly, the traditions that I know a bit more about, that they can be intensely demanding from a perspective wholly outside society's norms, actually.
Tim, you were mentioning
I just
in dispatches.
actually agree with an awful lot of that. I mean, I do think that the issue is not whether religion can only be used by dominant forces in society. I mean, religion, if you believe that religion is a social construct, which I do, then clearly it follows that societies are much more than just their dominant forces. So, I mean, we see it in the modern world. We see, whether it's talking about liberation theology, Salafism or anything like this, there are ways of being countercultural through the religious idiom. But that doesn't necessarily mean that religion... So the question really is what is driving what, isn't it? And I think that's and I'm kind of quite open-minded about this, actually, but the question is whether religion is something that we can identify as distinct from society, that somehow stands behind it and pushes it forward, which seems to me more of a kind of a believer's point of view, or whether, as I would see it, religion is actually part of the idiom of a given society and is a flexible medium that can be used by different people for different purposes because, hey, yes, societies are complex.
Rupert, we haven't heard from you yet. Hello. Hello, welcome. Isn't as we're on religion, isn't the inevitable consequence of monotheism an in-group and an out-group? A them and an us. We know the truth and they don't.
No, absolutely not. I mean, one of the questionable statements made so far today is if I think my religion is right, then the other 99,000 are wrong. I think on the contrary, it's a consequence of believing in that we're all made in the image of God that makes the core element of Christianity, what I take away from the story of the lost sheep, is that it's actually people who are outside.
But we've had countless people of all faiths who have been strict adherents to the thought, not everybody, of course, but of certain faiths, strict adherents to the thought that they are right, theirs is the only way, and everyone else is wrong.
Yes,
Catholic
I'm not
Church,
saying...
after all, is notorious for killing heretics.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that the message hasn't been corrupted. I'm going to slightly higher authority in what I
It's
believe
always very
about
easy to
God.
defend religion by pretending that what you want its message to be has actually been corrupted by the way it's played out
And
in history.
it's
very
disingenuous.
hard
That
to
is
think.
disingenuous.
No, it's true.
No, it's not.
very
It's
hard to
disingenuous,
think
and I'll tell you why.
any statement that's more
Because
historically verified. than
It's
the statement there is
disingenuous to take the authority,
inter-religious
to take the
disagreement.
institution of religion and judge a set of beliefs on the basis of what some people have done in that institution is disingenuous. What Rupert is talking about is what his particular religion calls us to, which is a higher kind of love. And actually, that's the two things are
A
completely
higher
different.
kind of love than what?
Well, Rupert can answer that.
It's the priority of the outsider, I think. The idea that, I mean, the church is sometimes said to be the one organisation that exists for the sake of its non-members. And when Jesus' teaching is being taken seriously, I mean, that's the big question. I wouldn't deny. Good heavens, it's because I'm a Christian that I've got fairly robust views on the dysfunctionality of the church.
Yeah.
But when the gospel is taken seriously, then the message, surely no one would deny that at the core of Jesus' message, whether one accepts it or not, is one of radical self-giving love.
Okay.
Then it's not about them and us.
Audience, let's have some thoughts from the audience. Gentleman there, hello, yeah, on you go.
So, essentially...
Quick points,
well,
please.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it seems to me that the question, did man create God? What the Honourable Rabbi said earlier is very important. Ultimately, any conception of God that we have is going to be through our hearts and minds, through 2 ears, 1 nose, 2 eyes, 1 brain. And so, of course, it's going to be...
in the case of some of
2
these
brains,
people,
of course,
don't
yeah,
you?
maybe 2 brains in the front row. But it seems that, so obviously it's going to be anthropomorphized. So the question then becomes, does God exist? Which is, of course, an impossible question. And I think, although this question is important, maybe... one which might be more worthwhile asking is how does God, or whatever we mean by God, realise himself in our hearts and minds? And
it's too late, we're 40 minutes in. but yes, I mean, but this is interesting about social constructs and so forth. Lady there in the red top, just a quick point from you, go on.
Just going off the point he just made, does God exist? I don't believe it's an impossible question to answer. It's just that it's whether or not people want to believe that God exists or not, and I believe that the evidence of God is all around us if only we were to open up our eyes and accept that.
Bruce Hood, what does the concept of a divine judge, if you've been good, if you've been bad, tell us about, in your view, the societies from which it comes?
We've heard a lot about love, haven't we? But I point out that a lot of religion is fear, and that works in that way, and that's a way in which you can improvise or you can put into place social control by not breaking the moral code. So a lot of religions are based on fear. Fear of death, fear of infertility, fear of poverty, and fear of retribution. So one of the ideas...
The fires of hell.
Fires of hell. I mean, if you just have to look through the history, it's quite clear. Not only are they attacking other religions, but within their own, they're using that to control people. So I think that's something...
It's not about control, it's about accountability, right?
Right, it's still...
You don't want like Hitler getting off scot-free in the afterlife, right? You want him to be punished, or at least there should be some accountability.
It might be a better
in that case.
religion
It's not
if you
about
did
control.
want Hitler getting off scot-free in the afterlife. If you believed in a God of forgiveness, actually, that might be better.
There's the
Okay, well, we're still over here, because it's interesting. That was an interesting little diversion there, but this whole idea of hell and of punishment. Carry on, Bruce.
Yeah, so there's research showing that children will spontaneously think or behave themselves if they think there's a ghost in the room, or they think that they're being observed by some supernatural agent. And one of the ideas is that we then kind of transpose that father figure or that authority figure to become a divine God, so that becomes a moral compass for how we behave.
Yeah, there's an ancient Greek who said exactly that in 5th century BC. He said that there was a wise lawgiver who gave us laws, and then we carried on being naughty in practice, in private, and then that wise lawgiver also invented religion so that we would be policed in private as well. It's exactly the same idea.
Speculation. In the Bible as well.
Speculation, says Abdullah. Elaine, I want to hear from Satish in a second, but Elaine, I feel I want to hear from you on this. I want to hear your wisdom and your thoughts on this idea of divine judgment. To the casual observer, it looks like a human construct.
Yes, and in many ways, the way in which we go about fabricating judgment and pronouncing judgment on one another is very human. And it's about blame. It's about vindicating one's self-righteousness. And we have all kinds of mechanisms for handling this in society after society, where people will not put their hands up and say, yeah, I was wrong, I made a mess, I screwed this up, I'm the guilty one, please forgive me. The point about religion is...
punishment.
Yeah, but the punishment is almost irrelevant. It's a secondary issue. The big issue is...
Not if you're being punished.
The big issue is why do people do this? Why do people relate to each other in this kind of way? And what do they expect as a result of it? And Arif earlier on said that science has explained so many things and religion explains none of these things that science has explained. This is not what religion is about. Religion, and I would include many scientific religions in this.
What's scientific religion?
Secular religions, which are scientistic. In other words, they have faith in science as producing all the answers, all the understanding and so on.
It's not faith.
But let me finish. Well,
hang on. That's a very vital point to get a quick response on before we proceed. Arif?
It's not, yeah, just on that particular point, it's a common trope amongst theists, and it's a completely false to say that science is some kind of faith. There is no better evidence for anything than there is for any of the many scientific theories I could mention, like quantum theory. Are you saying quantum theory is a faith? Are you saying relativity is a faith?
No, you're not listening.
Are you saying the germ theory is a faith?
You are not listening.
What is the thing that you're calling a faith?
You're not listening.
They're always divided. A bunch of scientists always want to disagree with each other, always want to disprove each other, and that's the dynamic of science, which is absolutely... Let me get back to punishment.
There is... No, let me say where I am, because I need to finish this now.
OK.
Because scientism is a faith in science. It's a faith that actually science ultimately will have all the answers to all the questions that we can have. Whereas often science simply does not have even all the questions. So
it's got more answers than it did have, so it's moving, like that. The gap's getting smaller and smaller.
It's fantastic that we actually...
There are scientists who are
Can I just finish what I'm trying to say?
Of course there are.
So basically what's going on with all of these kind of positions, whether they're religious positions, whether they're secular positions, whether they're political positions and so on, is that they're offering people worldviews. And worldviews are those things that are actually underneath all of our social ramifications and our societal developments. So worldviews are answering fundamental questions like, who or what is God?
Yeah, okay.
Who am I? What is it to be a human being?
But they would say the non-overlapping magisterium, they're separate. You've got to say, I mean,
what is reality?
Cole's right. We're going to go to Satish. I mean, some of the great scientists are theists. Some of the great evolutionary biologists, Ken Miller, Francisco Ayala, are theists.
Can I make a point about that?
Which makes the point that they are separate magisteria. Satish, I want to hear from Satish. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I want to hear from Satish. Because if we're talking about divine punishment or retribution or reward, you are on a constant, as we all are, as you believe, a constant cycle of reincarnation until we reach a stage where we are free from birth and free from death. And that's a kind of, quite an optimistic view, ultimately, because we're all heading in the right direction, despite the fact that we may have some diversions along the way.
Well,
would that be an accurate way of putting it?
Yeah, it's not too bad. Starting from the premise that both cannot be proven, that either we're doomed and we have to be redeemed, or that we're actually on a positive journey, assuming for a moment that neither can be proven, the more positive one would seem to be more reasonable to adopt. But turning to whether it can be proven, pure scientific method, replicable, something that anybody can do, requires, if you want to establish, did the mystic establish a connection with some divine entity, you follow and replicate his experiment. You don't talk about it. You actually go, be still and know that I am divinity. And so unless you have actually done that, then it's all noise. It's just mental cogitations and...
What's one of these mystical events like? What is it like to experience? Have some of us experienced it before when we're listening to, I don't know, Elgar's cello concerto or Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club? Have we experienced it? Have we gone in a kind of state that you're... What are you talking about?
In fact, I would suggest that it's the natural default for all of us.
We
are all created to experience something within us which, when it's removed, this body falls apart and decays and decomposes.
Have some of us experienced it without realising that it's a mystical thing? I mean, what is it?
I would suggest that there are... The chattering of the mind, once that ceases, then you start to have an opening inside. And that opening is the first of the journeys. But there's something Francesca said, which I wanted to touch on, which is to do with gender and to do with creating gods.
Then she can answer you. Carry on.
Misogynists create misogynist gods.
Yeah.
Right? You can identify the nature of the person who has created that god, and indeed that then reeks of a theocracy in its birth. Where there is divinity, there has to be no violence. It can't be intellectually violent, it can't be emotionally violent, and it can't be physically violent. If there is any violence present, there is no divinity present there.
So there's no divinity in any of the major religions in that case.
I started...
Francesca, Francis Satish, he directed something towards you, Francesca.
I think it's a real shame that, and we find this, I mean, there's a lot about Hinduism that I particularly like, actually, as opposed to a lot of other religions. But I think it's a real shame that in all of the people representing different religions here, they're so down on humanity and what it is to be a person. Why do you want to get rid of the human body? Bodies are amazing. What's wrong with material world?
No, we have
What's wrong with experiencing?
You're putting words into our mouths.
For as many lifetimes as you wish.
But that's the thing. But what is it? But religion seems to want to be able to offer some kind of an escape from the world that we have now.
That's a paradigm. That's a paradigm.
Rabbi Charlie,
Judaism is so much about this world. It's not about doing things because right now because of the reward in the next world. It's very much, and I think a lot of Jews would talk about their relationship with God as in their relationship with other human beings. It's not about the future. It's about right now, and because of that, the body is very much part of the soul. One of the first blessings that Jews would say when they get up in the morning is one to thank that the body still works.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, absolutely, it's a great thing to be thankful for, and it's not about separating the soul from the body, but actually the reality is in that relationship that actually we find God.
How much of your day, Abdullah, do you spend? Because some people say that Islam is very much thinking about what will happen in the afterlife, and it's kind of quite afterlife-centric a lot of the time. How often do you think about the afterlife?
Well, you know what? I mean, if you have to look at human existence, if we believe that human existence there's more than just this life, we shouldn't neglect our portion of our worldly portion, as the Quran says. We do not neglect your worldly portion, but at the same time, also work towards something greater. People, even atheists, would work towards a future for their kids they will never see, which is beyond their lifetime. So they're working for something outside their lifetime.
Yes.
But the point I really wanted to raise today is, man didn't really create God. God created man, and man created idols. And we shouldn't throw God out with the idols. Okay? Because they're different things. And atheists do not have a monopoly on scientists. For the vast majority of human history,
I said that, Arif.
Scientists have been theists.
I said that, Arif. Well, I know. A lot of evolutionary biologists, as I said,
but there is no clash between God and
Thank you very much.
Non-overlapping magisterium, just like you two. Arif.
I mean, I think one thing about Islam is that actually, in many ways, Islam is very focused on life in this world in a way that Christianity isn't. So, for instance, Islam places constraints on a great deal of people's everyday behaviour that Christianity doesn't. It constrains your financial transactions, it constrains your personal hygiene, it constrains the way you dress, it constrains a vast amount of people's lives. So in many ways, it's totalitarian. And the other thing I would say is that, of course, Islam is not the only one. These other religions do, but many religions have a very severe and deleterious effect on people's lives in this world. If you think all the people who are homosexual and the things they've suffered because of religion. All the people
everyone's conscience is totalitarian.
All the things that are going on in Raqqa
everybody's conscience is totalitarian
right now because of your religion.
Everyone's conscious. That might be easy for you to say, but everyone's conscience is a totalitarian. Everyone's conscience guides them throughout the entire day.
What do you mean everyone's conscience is totalitarian?
Yes, because...
What does that mean?
Well, totalitarian means it encompasses every aspect of your life. So we would like to think that a person's conscience would guide them through every aspect of their life. What they do, how they treat people, helping people and so on. Everyone's conscience is totalitarian. You're just saying the word, this is totalitarian.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
A person who does not have a totalitarian conscience is a hypocrite who acts on pragmatic principles which are selfish.
My conscience doesn't tell me
and not based on higher principles.
My conscience doesn't tell me I should prostrate myself in a certain direction 5 times a day.
Well, that's because we disagree.
Elaine Starkey, let's get on to the basic point. And I know you'll go off on a flight of fantastic, erudite, philosophical, theological rhetoric, as you do, and that's why we have you on here. We cherish your presence. Let me answer this question. I had Brian Cox talking the other day about the cosmos and about the universe.
Yes.
And it's just overwhelmingly awesome and it's mind-bogglingly wonderful. And he said there are billions of planets where it is quite possible that there will be life out there. Say that there were to be a planet there with intelligent life, and there is every possibility that that is the case somewhere we will never know about
Yes.
it. Would they have the same God that we do?
Of course, of course. Because if God is creator of the entire universe...
They'd be monotheists, would they?
If God... No, monotheism, that's just a word.
Okay. But it would be the same God.
The God who created the whole of entirety.
He or she would have transmitted the divinity, God consciousness to them.
The understanding of God is that God is actually the eternal creator, the one who put everything into place. The Big Bang, within seconds of the Big Bang, all of the structures and the fabrics of the possibility of creation were already there, and we've been working on those structures ever since. And so the concept of God as creator, and then God as incarnate. I mean, the whole
creating
point...
a world that created itself as
yes,
well.
that carries on working with God, creating itself, but then God becoming part of the world. And this is why Francesco is so utterly wrong about the fact that Christianity doesn't care about the body. Of course it does. Christ became a body. He was a body.
In order
he lived along
then to
other
push
people.
through
He suffered as a body.
All right, Francesca's got to answer that
mortality.
question. Wait, let's get a clear answer. Go on.
In order to push through mortality, in order to deny human experience.
Not at all.
This
No.
is a
In order to
God who
embody
became a
love.
human who supposedly didn't have sex, didn't have much to do with women, told people to
please,
reject
give us
their
a break.
family.
Well, give us
told
a break.
people to reject
Elaine,
their
I'll be back with you. I'll be back
I'm
with
talking
you.
about the biblical portrayal. Obviously, I don't believe this. That he told people to reject their family and to give up on their sense of tradition. This is not a God who cherishes what it is to be a human by becoming materially embodied. This is about a God that puts it on like a dressing gown and then takes it off again. It's absolutely ridiculous to think that that poor, crumpled corpse on a cross is somehow a celebration of what it is to be human.
Well,
Right, well, then I think I do have a right to reply on that.
You do have a right to reply. Of course you do.
First of all, Jesus was very, very fully human in the sense that he was there to
because he wasn't God.
demonstrate love. He was there to actually call human beings to a different kind of life, a different life of love towards one another, love towards God, of actually well-being, of going the extra mile, of forgiveness, most of all of forgiveness, of not allowing somebody else... Please let me finish. Not allowing somebody else's damage to damage you, but to actually be able to transcend that.
No,
And the whole issue of women,
women.
is such a nonsense because the people who supported Jesus financially were women. Some of the greatest disciples were women.
And yet
The women
they're
were
not
the ones who went out and spread the message.
And yet, where are these women represented in the religion? Where are these goddesses?
All over
Where
the
are
place. I'm afraid you need to read the Gospels better. And
I'm going to stay with the women, right? You need to... She's a biblical scholar, to be fair.
Well, there's scholarship and scholarship.
No, where Francesca...
Oh,
It means reading the text.
hang on. And listen, this is good. I'm going to stay with this one. Francesca, there's scholarship and scholarship.
Yeah, what I find really interesting about scholarship quite often is there's an awful lot of intellectual gatekeeping and there's an awful lot of older generation scholars who like to keep younger scholars down. There's nothing wrong with my scholarship, I assure you.
OK, I think, to be fair to Francesca, where I agree with you...
God bless the
is that
peacemakers. That's what I say.
I have a great deal of sympathy with both of you, I would like to say. I mean, where I sympathise with you, as I don't think it is sensible to deny that there is a very world-denying and body-denying strain in Christianity, there's no question, but all the major religious traditions that we're talking about are very complex things, and they have within them both, they have things about them that we may find difficult and not like. A world-denying strain in Christianity I don't like very much. A strain in Christianity which colludes with worldly rulers I don't like very much, but that's not the whole of the tradition. One thing I find, we were talking a minute ago about science and religion, one thing I find discouraging a little bit about debates between science and religion and scientists
It's not
and
really
religion.
what this is, but yeah.
Well, we have been talking about it, and I think it's an important kind of framing issue in the argument, is that we think about and talk about and evaluate science on its aspirations, on the best of it, on what it hopes to achieve. We slightly tend to ignore all the ways in which science is also socially framed and socially controlling.
Self-regulating, that's the point.
Well, but it's not. It's drug company regulated. It's politically regulated.
But that's not science. That's not science. Bruce, go on. No, get response. That's quite a thing to say. Bruce.
That is fundamentally wrong.
No.
You have to sign a declaration if you have a conflict of interest if you're producing a scientific paper. Now, of course, drug companies are driving the agenda, but a good scientist will be accountable. The results will be replicable. Everything will be evidence-based.
And repeatable. Listen, the last word, and it's going to be a 20-second sentence from Cole Morton. Cole Morton, as long as we're on the planet, Homo sapiens, will God be around?
Yes. God created man and woman equal in his image. And it's preposterous to think that Christians exist on another planet. But if God does exist, then that God exists in that other planet, and it's the kind of God that Elaine and Arif and Francesca and my friend here are all trying to describe and to get to, or to ignore.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much indeed. That was for you, that round of applause. As ever, debates continue until the next Sunday. We're live from Uxbridge. Do join us then. From now, it's goodbye from everyone here in Oxford, and have a great Sunday. Thanks again for watching.